The next thing we need to talk about is correlation and experimental studies. These are examples of research studies. So let's give a definition for research studies. So what is a research study here? Okay, so a research study is a study that's used to determine whether or not there's a relationship between two or more variables. So study used to determine the relationship between two or more variables. Okay, in an intro to statistics class, we're really going to be just looking at research studies that involve two variables. Okay, as you add more variables, the math would get more complicated. So for us, it's going to be some study that's used to determine the relationship between two variables. So remember, a variable is just some characteristic that varies from person to person or observation to observation in a population. Okay, and you're wondering, does some relationship exist between two variables? Okay, now there's two types of these studies. There's correlation, and your book calls this an observational study. And there's experimental studies. Okay, so we're going to look at each one of these. So what is a correlation study? Okay, and some books call these type of studies observational studies. For me, it's I'm much more used to calling it a correlation study, but these two terms can be used interchangeably. They're referring to the same type of study. Okay, so a correlation study is where two variables are observed to see if a relationship exists between them. Okay, so two variables are observed to see if a relationship exists between them. Okay, and of course it could be two or more variables are observed. Okay, but for us it'll just be two variables. And the key here is that they're observed. These variables are only observed, and you're looking to see whether or not a relationship exists between them. That's why sometimes it's called an observational study. Okay, so I have an example here, and it's going to involve this overhead. So let me move this, and this is an example of a correlation study. So let's say you're a researcher, maybe an educational researcher, and you're interested whether or not a relationship exists between the number of hours that a student works outside of class, so not the number of hours that they're spending working on their school, but some job outside of class that might take them away from their schoolwork. Okay? Is there a relationship between the number of hours they work per week and their grade point average? Okay? And so what we do here is we take a sample of 5 college students. And for each college student, we observe the number of hours that they work and their grade point average. So we're observing two variables for each college student. Okay? So I would say my sample has only 5 college students. But I'm collecting data here, 2 observations from each one. Okay? This is called bivariate data. because you're looking at two variables for each observation in your sample. Okay? And you want to see, is there a relationship between these two variables? So what you can do is you can put them in a table, like I've done here, and then pick one of the variables and just put it in order. So this is going, this is increasing. The number of hours that they work is going from 4 up to 41 hours. And then I can look at their grade point average and see, is there some sort of relationship? Is there a trend in these variables? Are they increasing also, or are they decreasing, or are they just random? Okay, so if I look at this, it looks, at least in general, overall, they seem to be decreasing, because it's starting at 3.78 and it's going down. Now it does go up a little, but at least in general, they are going down. So the general trend is that they are decreasing. Okay? And so what this is one increases, the other one decreases. That's known as a negative correlation between the variables. So this does seem to have a negative correlation. As one variable increases, the other variable decreases. Okay? So yes, it does seem like that there's some relationship between these variables. Now, we might be tempted by looking at this data, we might be tempted to think that the number of hours that you work per week will cause your grade point average to go down. Okay? Now that may or may not be the case, but it's important to realize that a correlation study does not prove a cause and effect relationship. You're just observing the values of the variable to see if a relationship exists, but you don't know if that relationship is a cause and effect relationship. Okay? So it could be true as the number of hours increase, the grade point average goes down. But the correlation study does not prove that. So there's a nice, I don't know if you've heard this. This says correlation does not prove cause and effect relationship. There's kind of a nice saying that says correlation does not prove causation. And maybe you've heard that in a psychology class or a sociology class. But oftentimes when you do studies like this, and you note that there's a correlation, it's important to realize that the correlation does not prove a cause and effect relationship. Now this next example helps illustrate that. Okay? So let me move this up. I want to cover this here. So this is a researcher, and he's interested in whether there's a relationship between the number of churches in a city and the number of violent crimes. Okay, so he looks and he takes a sample of 5 cities, and it seems as the number of cities increases, the number of violent crimes is also increasing. And this would be a positive correlation. So it seems like there's a positive correlation between these variables. As one increases, the other one also increases. Okay? So he looks at this now. This seems somewhat counterintuitive, but it looks like, according to his data here, churches cause violent crimes. Okay? Now, if he drew this conclusion, we would know that that was the wrong conclusion. Okay? Because it's so clear what's going on in this case. There is a correlation between the variables. As one variable increases, the other variable will also increase. Okay, so there is a relationship, a correlation, but it certainly isn't a cause and effect relationship. The churches don't cause the violent crimes. So clearly the relationship is when you take a specific town, the size of the town, okay, the population will determine the number of churches and the number of violent crimes. So larger cities will have more churches. They will also have more violent crimes. Okay? So the relationship between these two variables is clear, and it's clearly not a cause and effect relationship. Okay? Now the relationship between these variables is not so clear. Okay? But we do notice there's a relationship. As one increases, the other one decreases. Okay? It could be a cause and effect relationship, but just observing the values of the variable is not enough to determine what type of relationship it is. There could be many different reasons for the relationship. So if you want to show that there's a cause and effect relationship between two variables, then what you have to do is you have to do a different sort of study. Okay, and that is an experimental study.